Hello and welcome everybody. If someone could please raise their hand if they can hear me, and just so I make sure that my sound is working. Okay, thank you guys. I'm counting the sound is on. All right, so this is a new talk because this is some really, well, to me, let me start from scratch. I've been studying essential fatty acids for over 30 years, so it's not a new subject. When I was looking back at my notes earlier today, I was like, oh yeah. When I was an undergraduate, I was 18, 19 years old. I was obsessed by this subject. I guess if you want to do the math, okay, that's more than 30 years ago. That's like a really, really long time ago. And so what's different about this now is that my understanding has really matured as I have matured. And so that's what I want to talk about tonight. And there's a lot of misconceptions about healthy fat, what fat is, what healthy fats should be, how you should supplement, how you shouldn't supplement. And there's a lot of misconception around laboratory testing for this kind of information. So I want to talk about this because I feel like we should, you all, whether you're a doctor that's listening to this, or you're a potential patient or patient of mine, or potential future patient of some functional medicine doctor, you should just know this stuff. This is like basic information that we should all know. And so I'm going to start off where it all starts. If you can see the board here, with the idea of how we produce cellular energy and why this is so important. So the human body takes, well, let's take a step back. Take a step back even further. So the planet, the cosmos, right, has plants, which is our primary food source, and plants grow in response to pulling in nutrients from the soil, right, and then being able to pull in carbon dioxide and all the nutrients they need through their leaves and through photosynthesis. And so we want to look at it on the simplest level in terms of the energy production. There's sunlight that's hitting plants on a constant basis, right? And they're capturing that energy on their leaves. The leaves are like little solar panels, and they're converting that energy ultimately into some kind of nutrient like glucose, or they may be growing an antioxidant. We'll talk about that a little bit, that they're using ultimately for their own purposes, right? For the plant's purposes. And so as the plant's growing and it's harnessing basically the energy of the sun, we then go ahead and eat that plant. And whether it's a blueberry or it's a piece of broccoli or it's a bowl of rice, whatever it may be, and then we are absorbing the glucose or sugar from that plant along with all the other nutrients like minerals. And we're going to talk a lot tonight, especially about the antioxidants that are in the plant. So why do plants have antioxidants? What are they? So plants are outside all the time in general, unless you're a house plant. We don't eat house plants, right? So plants are outside all the time. If you're a blueberry, you turn blue. If you're raspberry, you turn red. If you're broccoli, piece of broccoli, you turn green. And plants use pigments or color to protect themselves from the oxidizing rays of the sun. Imagine how you would feel if you were out 24 hours a day in sunlight. You would get kind of a little upset about life too, right? And so plants use pigments. We see them as colors. They use pigments as antioxidants to protect themselves from the oxidizing radiation, the damage that's happening potentially to their tissues from the sun. And so then we go along and eat the plant. If it's a red pepper, you get those kinds of antioxidants. If it's a blueberry, you get these really intense antioxidants. And we're actually capturing the protection system of the plant, and then we're using those antioxidants for our own purposes, which I'll talk about in a minute, okay? And so there's this equation for human beings then about the rate at which we're burning up energy and the amount of antioxidant protection that we've gotten from plants to protect ourselves against the oxidative stress that we're experiencing. And so let me just show you like what oxidative stress is. I've got some pictures here. They're a little bit out of order, so I'm going to have to skip around. Sorry about that part. But here's basically oxidative stress in a nutshell, or in an apple. So the top picture there, you slice an apple in half, it starts to turn brown. It's oxidizing. That same process of oxidation caused by free radicals happens to our cells. Okay. If you ever noticed that you cut an apple in half and it turns brown, but if you cut a mango in half, does it get all nasty like that? in a couple of hours, does it start to turn brown like an apple would? No, mangoes don't, because the mangoes that are, brightly orange colored have the antioxidants inside the mango itself, whereas with an apple, most of the antioxidants are on the outside, in the skin. That's why they say you should always eat the skin of a fruit, because and for many of them, the antioxidants are carried in the fruit. But again, mango is a good example of the opposite, right? You cut a mango in half, it's nice and orange. It stays nice and orange all day long because the antioxidants there are protecting the mango. So these plants have these antioxidants. They grow them, produce them for their own purposes to protect themselves. We simply eat the plant and then we get the antioxidant. Okay. Now, why do we need the antioxidants? Well, when we're in the process of making cellular energy for ourselves inside these structures called the mitochondria, what's happening is we're taking protein, primarily we're taking fat or carbohydrate, and we're converting that into a fuel supply, right? So we're eating these plants and we're getting the energy from these plants. But in the process of making this cellular energy, we generate a lot of free radicals. Another term for this is we generate a lot of oxidative stress, okay? And is oxidative stress bad? No, it's really good. It's really bad. It's all things, right? Because it's a necessary process. I think the easiest example to imagine is if you were lighting a fire in a fireplace and you were all of a sudden burning this wood. Is the fact that sparks are flying off bad? No, it's just kind of a natural consequence of burning up the energy of the fuel supply from the wood. So when our bodies are making energy inside the mitochondria, we're dumping all these fats and carbohydrates into this system to burn up for fuel, and the sparks flying off are these free radicals. Okay, and if there's a small amount of free radicals being generated, it's not a big deal because we have antioxidants. Where do we get them? From eating these plants, the blueberries and the broccolis of the world, right? And those antioxidants then are protective and they knock out the free radicals so they don't cause a problem. And that's normal human physiology. Now, when we're making this cellular energy, we're taking the sugar or the glucose or the fat from the foods that we're eating, plant products, animal products, if you're a meat eater, animal eater, wherever the nutrients are coming from, right? And then ultimately, we can only burn them up in the mitochondria in the presence of oxygen. It's exactly like a fire in your fireplace. You want the fire to burn brighter and better, you fan it, right? You give it more oxygen. So it's the same exact thing for the mitochondria. We get more oxygen, we get better capacity to burn fuel, to burn energy. But the more oxygen we get, the more energy we make, the more sparks fly off, the more antioxidants we need to protect ourselves from the free radicals. So what you see on the right-hand side is when this system gets damaged, when mitochondria are damaged, then all of a sudden bad things happen. There's a lot of free radicals, right, that cause oxidative stress. They oxidize our tissues, just like that apple can turn brown, just like a nail or a screw that's outside can start to rust, right? And we don't have enough cellular energy as a result of that because these structures called mitochondria are being damaged. Okay, and that's in general considered bad. Now, oxidative stress in the right amount is good if it's balanced out with a healthy diet, etc. But too much oxidative stress is a hallmark for really serious problems. And there's a variety of tissues in the human body that get damaged from this excessive oxidative stress. Okay, one of them is the mitochondria, which is depicted here. And again, sorry, I have to skip around because these slides are all over the place. I think they're in the beginning here. I got a good one on this though. Yeah, so the other tissues that can get potentially damaged are the DNA inside the nucleus of the cell. Is that a good thing if your DNA gets damaged? No, that's like extra bad. Damage to DNA leads to abnormal cell replication. That's what we call cancer. That's extra bad. The damage to the mitochondria puts us at risk of premature aging, fatigue, weight gain, all the things that the mitochondria do. They burn fat, they give us energy, all that stuff falls apart. The mitochondrial energy runs the brain. People get brain fog and those kinds of things if the mitochondria are damaged by this oxidative stress. And then what we're going to talk a lot about tonight is when lipids get damaged. Lipids is the fancy word for fat. I think it's worth using the scientific term lipid because when you say fat, you could call somebody fat, you could feel like you're fat, you could say you look like you're fat. You could say, I feel like I'm fat. You could say, don't eat that, it's fattening. We use the word fat a lot, but we don't say like, wow, you look like you have a lot of lipids, or like, I feel like I have a lot of lipids today, or that meal had a lot of lipids in it. So I think using the term lipid, even though it just means fat, is a way of kind of divorcing ourselves from the emotions around the word fat. But just so you know, we can use these terms interchangeably. Lipid just is a fancy scientific term that means fat. Okay, and we're going to talk about all kinds of different lipids tonight, and we're going to talk about this process that it's marked out right here called lipid peroxidation. Okay, that's a fancy word for saying your fat is getting oxidized. Remember, we saw the apple turning brown. You can imagine if the healthy fats in your body are getting oxidized or damaged, it's kind of like they're rusting. That is not a good thing. Your brain is 60% fat. Your cardiovascular system is very sensitive to what's happening to the lipids or fats, right? That's the whole LDL, HDL thing, cholesterol, all these things we talk about all the time to do with lipids, right? So if lipids are being damaged, if lipid peroxidation is high because of oxidative stress, then you're in trouble. Your brain's in trouble, your cardiovascular system's in trouble, your membranes for all the cells are in trouble, your hormone production is in trouble. The lipids are really important, okay? Or we can say fat. So I'll maybe use those terms interchangeably so you can kind of get familiar with that. But anyways, and it's nice knowing some of the medical terms. You should. The other things that oxidative stress can trigger would be inflammation. That would be your joint pain, your achiness, your arthritic type symptoms, right? Inflammation is associated strongly with pain. Inflammation is associated with depression. Inflammation is associated with almost every disease now that we're studying this more carefully. So the more oxidative stress you have, the more potential fat and fatigued you get, the more potential you have for being inflamed, depressed, the more potential you have for developing cancer, for developing cardiovascular disease. I mean, it's a pretty serious problem to have a lot of oxidative stress. Okay? But we're going to focus tonight primarily on lipid peroxidation, on what happens to your fats when they get oxidized, and why is that so important, and what kind of fat do you need in your system in the first place anyways, right? That's the theme for tonight. Okay, so that's kind of the introduction. Just to, these are just some notes I had from earlier, but omega-3, omega-6, these are the main fats that we're going to be talking about. What do they do? They form and create the fluidity for all the cell membranes in the body. Every cell membrane, again, your brain is 60% fat, but every cell throughout every part of your body has a membrane or an outer container. It's like if there was a water balloon, it's the outside of the water balloon, right? The balloon itself. And that membrane is made up of fat. So we're dependent on these fats or lipids for nervous system function. They're also the seat of production for all the hormones, progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, cortisol, DHEA. All these hormones are made from fat. They help regulate our blood pressure. They completely control the inflammatory and immune responses. So they're really, really, really important to think about. Okay. And when we talk about lipid peroxidation, and I just wanted to pull out one study just so you can see there's a lot of science behind this. There are like literally tens of thousands of studies on this subject area. But just so you get kind of familiar with the idea, hey, you could go online and find a study in 10 seconds just like I did and start to read about these things. And don't be too intimidated. At least you can read the abstract and get the summary. So here's a quick summary. In recent years, it has become apparent that the oxidation of lipids, again, remember that's the damage or the rusting of the fat, the damage of the healthy fat, or lipid peroxidation, is a crucial step in the pathogenesis. That means the formation of disease in adults and in babies, right? Lipid peroxidation is a process generally natural in small amounts. We already talked about that, but when it gets out of control, it's not so good. And then here, the destruction of lipid membranes and the end products of such lipid peroxidation reactions are dangerous for the viability of cells, even tissues. That means that cells die, tissues die in the presence of a lipid peroxidation, right, when these things are being damaged. And then at the end here, they just wrap up with the bad news. Lipid peroxidation implicated in diseases such as atherosclerosis, IBD, asthma, everything from Parkinson's to kidney damage. Okay, so this is super important. It's not just a random subject, and we're not talking about fat. And when you think about like body fat, we're talking about these fats here, the omega-3 and the omega-6 fatty acids. Okay, so the omega-3s are probably the better known, They include these complicated names, but you should know a little bit about these names because they're going to be on supplement bottles, right? So if you're going to even consider taking supplements, you got to know this stuff. So if you look at the omega-3 column here, and we'll look at this, and I have several different diagrams that say the same thing, just to get you familiar with it. The first omega-3 is alpha linoleic acid. Usually people call that ALA. Okay, ALA. The next one that's of importance, I mean, these are all important in a way, I guess, but this one is super important here. Okay, EPA. You'll see that on labels of supplements a lot. EPA, that's a fish oil, right? There's another one that we'll see in a moment called DHA. And one of the reasons why these omega-3s are so important is because they produce something called prostaglandins. And we'll talk more about prostaglandins in a minute. Prostaglandins regulate the immune system. Prostaglandins regulate your inflammatory response. Prostaglandins are important. Okay, so omega-3s in general are acquired from things like flaxseed and fish oil. And if you're a vegan, you can get them from flax. If you're a meat eater, animal eater, you can get them from fish oils, from fish. Omega-6 fats are generally just from plants. And they have these funny names too. Linoleic. The next one that's super important is, actually it's not on this one. We'll see it in a minute in a later diagram, but GLA, we'll see GLA in a minute. There's DGLA. These also help us produce prostaglandins. Again, the prostaglandins have very strong control over regulating inflammation and our immune response. And there's a super duper important one called arachidonic acid that gets a lot of press. People talk about arachidonic a lot. And in general, people talk about arachidonic when it's high, and it's bad because high arachidonic means you're going to be really inflamed. Okay, so, and there's a general dogma now, which is totally, you're about to see, not valid at all. So this is like myth busting for fats right now, because I'm going to show you a bunch of labs that I've run in the last couple months on patients, and you're going to be like, wow, he's right. This dogma thing is not very accurate. The dogma that is existing now is that omega-3 fats are good for everybody, and everybody just needs more omega-3, more fish oil, and that omega-6 fats are bad because they're inflammatory and we all get too many omega-6s. Okay, that's the common nutritional state of the art. Omega-3s are good. Everyone needs omega-3s for depression and better skin, and omega-6s are bad. We all get too many omega-6s as it is. And so we should restrict omega-6 in the diet and increase omega-3, whether with supplements or with foods, however you want to do that. That is absolutely not true. And I'm going to show you a bunch of examples of that in a minute so you can see. Let's just do a little more of the introductory stuff and then we can get to that. Let's see. And we'll come back to these diagrams over and over. Here's another quick little thing. I mentioned that arachidonic is super important, remember? So arachidonic acid is from the omega-6 side. Okay, and this is why it's generally considered bad, because when it goes high, it stimulates an inflammatory response. And all these complicated terms here like COX-1, COX-2, inducible, and all this. It's one of the easy ways to remember arachidonic is it's directly related to aspirin and how aspirin works to help prevent headaches and pain and those kinds of things. There are these other compounds you can study later if you want, called leukotrienes, that are really important. But the main thing is that high arachidonic causes an inflammatory response, which is negative, right? Very negative. But the question is, does everybody have high arachidonic or not? And we're about to look at these labs. You'll see that that is not the case. The assumption is that there's going to be high levels of arachidonic with everybody. That's not true. Okay, so then on the omega-3 side, remember arachidonic is omega-6. The omega-3 side, we have EPA and DHA. Those are the famous ones. Strong roles to play in brain development. Again, 60% of your brain is fat, so these fats are very important for the health of your brain. Very, very important for your heart, your joints, your cognitive functioning, your triglycerides, your immune response. Okay, they're super, super important. And we can measure the omega-3 fats. We can measure EPA and DHA. We can measure arachidonic. We can measure linoleic, linolenic. We can measure lipid peroxides. I'm about to show you the tests for all these things. So let's just take a peek at a test and we'll come back to these just so you can see what the heck is this guy talking about. So here's a lab, and I've been really doing a lot of these tests lately. Everyone I can get my hands on, I'm testing. If you are not a patient of mine yet and you want to run this test, you should become a patient. We'll run this test. If you are a patient of mine already and I didn't run this test on you, just call the office tomorrow morning and tell them you want to order an ion panel. And it's a very complicated test to interpret, so I held off for around 20 years before I really got into it. But now that I'm into it, man, oh man, is it important. So let's look at just the things I talked about. Okay, here we have lipid peroxides. Remember we said that that's a really important thing to measure because that shows you whether your fats are getting damaged or not. There it is, lipid peroxides. It's one of the markers on the test. If that's high, it's bad. It means your lipids or your fats are getting oxidized or damaged. That's something that everyone should know, just as a general health kind of thing. And then I'm going to show you the actual omega-3 and omega-6s you can measure too. You see, you can measure omega-3. You'll see item number 1 there, alpha-linolenic. Item number 2, number 3, there's EPA, there's DHA. These are the fish oils. Now this particular patient, they're all normal. This is a wonderful thing. By the way, this is someone who's supplementing with fish oils. Someone in my practice who's supplementing with fish oils. I'm not saying I'm always perfect because this is the only perfect one you're going to see all night, but this is pretty good. This is what should happen if you take fish oils. It knocks all these omega-3s into the perfect range. But again, we're starting off on an upbeat here because you're going to see that it's not always that great. And then in this particular person, they had a little bit of high omega-6. Again, this is kind of like the dogma, right? That everyone needs threes, and again, this person is supplementing omega-3s, and omega-6 is like the bane of all existence, okay, and is really dangerous. And here's your arachidonic, which is marker number 9, and that is normal in this person, right? So now you have an idea what the testing is. We're testing for all these things that I'm talking about right now. That's the super cool part. Okay, again, we're talking about fatty acids, how important they are. Here's the actual cell membranes. Remember, I mentioned that these fats, we use them to produce our brains. We use them to produce the hormones like cholesterol. From cholesterol, we produce testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, cortisol, DHEA. A lot of really important hormones are made from these fatty acids. We use them for cell membrane construction. So what you're seeing here on a cell membrane, this is true for every cell in the human body, is there are these fats here, and then there are these fats here. And they have little tails, they like have heads and tails. And so they orient themselves based on their electrical charge. And so there's a fat on the inside and a fat on the outside, and they form what's called a bilayer, a phospholipid bilayer. It's basically like two fats facing off against each other by these electrical charges. And that is what creates every membrane in the human body. And membranes are important because anything that's going to go in or out of a cell is going to have to cross a membrane. Okay, so cell membranes have an extra super big importance, and they're all made from fat. If you have poor quality fat in your cell membranes, you have poor quality cell membrane function. And that is not something that you want to live with, or not for very long. Here's another diagram. It's the exact same thing. We're trying to show you in a few different ways so it starts to sink in, hopefully. You got the omega-3 over here. That's our fish, cold water fish, and flax. Okay. This first one here, we're going to measure this on the test. When you see these labs, ALA, remember ALA. Okay. Here we have EPA. Again, you'll see EPA on the fish oil supplement bottles, EPA. And then we have DHA down here at the bottom. Okay, so these are the famous omega-3s, ALA, EPA, DHA. And you can see when they're in balance, they reduce inflammation. When they're in balance, they help your brain, they help your hormones, all this good stuff. Okay, then on this other side here, you see the omega-6. These are from plants, from vegetable oils primarily, right? You have linoleic or LA. You have GLA. And again, GLA you'll see on supplement bottles if you're buying omega-6 supplements. And you have DGLA right here. And then this one that's highlighted in red with a big red arrow, which makes you know that it's important, arachidonic acid. And remember, the dogma there is that arachidonic is high in states of chronic inflammation. Arachidonic is creating the inflammation, creating a lot of problems. Therefore, omega-6s are bad. And that it's assumed then omega-3 good, omega-6 bad. We're just human beings, and it's really hard for us to see the gray area. But hopefully by the end of tonight, you're going to see that there's not even like a gray area. There's like a translucent area or see-through area or something like that. It's pretty complicated, okay? Another diagram for the same thing. Again, you'll see these on supplement bottles, GLA, arachidonic, oh, you won't see arachidonic, but GLA, EPA, DHA, okay? And here's another way of looking at the same thing. We have the fatty acids, you have the saturated and unsaturated, and you can see our 3s and 6s over there that we're talking about. Kind of get the bigger picture. And you'll also see on these labs that the saturated fat is also measured. And saturated fat in general has a bad rap, right? People eat too much saturated fat, so that we can look at and test these things. Lauric, palmitic, stearic acid, all the saturated fats are also on the lab. We also check the omega-9s on the lab, and there's some specific markers that you know about olive oil, all these kinds of other things that are healthy fats, if you're getting the right amount of them or not. Okay, so we'll see these in the lab in a minute too. And okay, I think that's it. So let's look at some more tests here. All right. Bingo. Now, I know this may be a little confusing, but I've been studying this for, what did we just do the math on? From what's 54 minus 18? I don't know, long time, right? 30, 40 years, and it's still confusing to me. So don't worry if you're not getting this tonight. The idea is just to start to, get a general sense of what the heck we're talking about. So the actual lab that we're looking at in relation to all these fats is called an ion panel. It was originally developed and created by my current teacher, a man named Richard Lord, who was the head scientist that developed this lab some 30 years ago. Been around for a long time. We're not going to talk about amino acids tonight, although they're quite interesting. We'll talk about them another night. We have a couple, 3 nights on this subject, so we're not going to talk about homocysteine. We're not going to talk about this person's magnesium levels that are really, really low, even though that's super important. And we're just going to cut over to lipid peroxides, right, which we talked about. And then this person, you can see the lipid peroxides are low. Low can be good. And then we're going to look at their lipids. And here we have a picture, and these are all recent patients of mine, okay, all in the last few months. Now we have a patient, and okay, that's just from the little bit you guys know already. Let's review what we talked about, okay? We talked about omega-3s, that's the fish oil and flax oil. Here we have our ALA, here we have our EPA, and here we have our DHA. Okay, we're measuring those exact fats. ALA in this patient is extremely low. EPA is kind of okay. DHA is extremely low. This person is low in omega-3 fats. This person needs to, probably not eat a lot more fish, because that would be kind of gross to eat enough fish to fix this. You would probably become sickened from fish. I wouldn't recommend it. This person needs, short-term treatment with omega-3 fish oils. Short-term is around 6 months. Then you would stop, you would retest, you would see if it's better. Oh, remember one I showed you that was perfect? We started off with that had all the markers right here. That's what 6 months of fish oils can do to someone who's low. Okay. Now, there's something kind of tricky, but I'm going to mention it because it's really important, which is that when you take omega-3 oils, there's an enzyme that breaks down those omega-3 oils. That same enzyme breaks down the omega-6s and helps you utilize them. So if you're taking omega-3 and you don't need it, and you take an excessive amount of it, it's going to actually interfere with your omega-6s. And I'll show you the enzyme because I have a picture of it right here. So it is delta-6 desaturase. So if you're taking omega-3s, that delta-6 desaturase is going to get pulled over here, and you're going to use it to process the omega-3s, and you're going to screw up your omega-6s, okay? So this one enzyme is shared by both omega-3 and omega-6, but there's a stronger tendency for the enzyme to work on the omega-3s. So if you're taking omega-3s and you don't need them, you're going to mess up your omega-6s. Okay? Now, if you're taking what you need and you're testing, then this all works out. But what I'm talking about is when people make mistakes on this. Okay, here we go. Let's go back to here again. Sorry, there we go. So now this particular person does need the omega-3s. They also happen, as you can see down below here, to be low in the 6s. You can see the polyunsaturated omega-6. These are the plant ones, right? And you can see low, low, low. Now, this is like a little mind-numbing, but this arachidonic that we're always worried about being so high and being pro-inflammatory in this particular patient is low. So human beings, all of us, I'm a human being, I'm included in this. We all have a tendency to see something and want to categorically, make it one thing. So we see arachidonic, and if you ask 100 different integrative medical doctors, 100 different integrative chiropractors, naturopaths, if you just take a room of 300 of these people and you ask them all, arachidonic acid, good or bad? Everyone would just say bad. Boom, I guarantee it right off the bat. Arachidonic, bad. Because when we associate arachidonic with being high, and that being pro-inflammatory. Okay, and no one ever thinks ever about, oh, what the heck happens when arachidonic is low and your omega-6s are low? That's not supposed to happen ever. That's the assumption. But guess what? You're going to see tonight it happens a lot. It happens all the time. I've seen this with so many patients just in the last couple of months. That's why I'm talking about this, because that's kind of an outrageous thing that I think we should all know about. So if your arachidonic is low, well, if your arachidonic is high and you're inflamed, if your arachidonic is too low, in a sense, it means you're underinflamed. That's not really a term or really a thing, but inflammation is on a scale, right? And if you have too much of it, it's bad. If you have just the right amount, it's good. If you don't have enough inflammation, you're underactive, you don't have enough of these omega-6s, you're underinflamed, that's a really, really bad thing. It's bad for your immune system. It's bad for your body in general. So this particular patient needed both omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, both. And guess what? We gave them to her and she got better. And her problem was depression. Although the problem could have been skin or a million other things too. So here's some of these other fats I just alluded to before. Oleic, the monounsaturated. We also measure the saturated fats. Lauric, palmitic, stearic. You can see saturated fat in general, we all think is bad. However, for some patients, you'll see extremely low saturated fat. And ironically, I think this only happened once this year, but I was able to prescribe butter. It's like, I don't know, you're really low in saturated fat. And the person was like, yeah, I don't eat any animal products. I don't, blah, blah, blah. I was like, okay, well, we could do coconut oil if you want to be all vegan about it, or you could do butter, but you need a little bit of saturated fat. And lo and behold, a couple of pats of butter later and boom, person's feeling better. So you can go too high or too low on saturated fat. Most of us obviously are too high with the amount of meat and dairy products that most of us consume. It's pretty rare that you see someone who's got low saturated fat, right? That's just kind of a fluky thing. Now, one other thing I want to show you about this test that's super cool is that I mentioned earlier that we measure lipid peroxides, and that's saying, is your fat being damaged? Is there structural damage to the cell membrane? Is there structural damage to the mitochondria? Are you having damage to the tissues that are related to oxidative stress? And there's two general categories of these tissues, right? There's ones that are fat-soluble antioxidants that protect the fatty tissues, and there's water-soluble antioxidants that protect the areas of the body that are aqueous or more in water solution. There is overlap between these, but just for the distinction of the purposes of this class and the test, I think you can separate them out. And so the fat-soluble antioxidants are primarily going to protect the lipid membranes and the brain and the areas where there's a lot of fat. The water-soluble antioxidants, we can talk about another night, are primarily going to protect things like the structure of the DNA and whatnot, because the DNA is in the cell nucleus, It's not surrounded by a bunch of fats in an aqueous solution. It's more of a water-based solution. So the reason why I mention this is because the lab test actually breaks out and separates the fat-soluble antioxidants, which are right here. These are the ones that protect your fat, okay, from the water-soluble antioxidants, which I can show you in a minute. So the fat-soluble antioxidants, some of these you may have heard of, CoQ10, alpha and gamma tocopherol. Tocopherol is a fancy word for vitamin E. Most of you have heard of vitamin A and beta carotene. So these are the key fat-soluble antioxidants, meaning that these are the antioxidants that are protecting the lipids from getting damaged. That would help prevent cardiovascular disease. That would help prevent obesity-related problems. That would help prevent the cell membrane from falling apart and hormone-related issues and all that stuff, right? And remember, the lipid peroxides is a measure of how much damage is happening. These fat-soluble antioxidants are the actual shields or protectors of the fat, of the lipids. So if you have a fair amount of oxidation or damage of fat and you have tons of these antioxidants, then the equation works out. However, if some of your fat-protecting antioxidants are low, like on this person, then you're in danger of your fat getting damaged, okay? And that is kind of interesting. So let's look at a few more. And in all honesty, these were completely randomly picked. I just asked my staff to pick a bunch of recent ion panels so I could do a talk, and this is what I got. I didn't go through like 100 different labs and pick out the ones that proved all the points I wanted to talk about. That probably would have been a little more clever of me. But honestly, I was rushing around. I didn't have time. So these are just like hot off the presses recent labs. Okay, so here's another test. Again, we're going to look at later on at some other evening. We'll look at amino acids, very important. We'll look at the heavy metals. These tests measure aluminum, lead, mercury. We'll look at, there's another low magnesium. Okay, these tests also measure the minerals. Those are really important too. But for now, we're looking at fat-soluble antioxidants. Now, this particular person, you can see the gamma tocopherol, alpha tocopherol, vitamin A, a little high. Okay, this is a patient who was a little extra gung-ho on taking supplements. Not my fault. Before I met them, they were just taking a few too many antioxidants. What's the life lesson there? Back off on the vitamin E. It was a great idea. You don't need as much as you're taking now. Back off on whatever you're taking that has vitamin A in it. So again, you can use these tests to see if you're dosing yourself about right or if you're taking too much of an antioxidant. The right amount of antioxidant is great. Too much is not a good thing. Okay, so this person needed to stop taking the antioxidant supplements. They're taking too much. That's a life lesson for all of us. However, doesn't look like they were taking their fish oil, does it? Guy, now again, these are just randomly selected from my recent couple months. Every single omega-3 is low. The ALA, the EPA, the DHA. It's like, the death march of essential fatty acid omega-3s. It's just like all gone. Zippo. So imagine how your cell membranes are feeling if this was happening. They'd be sluggish. Your brain would be not firing that great. You'd be a little depressed. You'd be a little tired. You wouldn't be able to burn body fat really well. Your skin wouldn't look that great. You're going to have some kind of problem. Hormone imbalances. It manifests in a lot of different ways because these fats are responsible for a lot of stuff. And of course, you could be incredibly inflamed and have a lot of pain. Now, in this particular patient, the omega-6s are fine. In fact, one of them is a little high. So we need to talk a little bit about maybe some, a little bit less of some of the vegetable oils for this person. Totally get that. But in the scheme of things, it's really primarily the omega-3s being low that's the big problem here, right? So this is a person who needs the omega-3s and needs to back off a little bit on the dietary sources of omega-6s, a little bit less with the vegetable oils of the world, okay? And you can see there's problems with some other fats here. We're not talking about these tonight, but it's pretty, what do you call it, detailed breakdown of all these other fats. All right. Oh, and just so you know, the test also includes these other kind of complicated things where they're looking at ratios and this kind of stuff, and we're not going to talk about it tonight, but there's more information on here that I'm going over, just kind of doing a cursory review. Let's look at another one. My hope is that you see a bunch of these, you start to kind of go, oh, okay, these are all a little different, aren't they? It'd be really hard for someone to know. Okay, now we have 57-year-old female, someone that I tested in the last few months. We're not talking about minerals or metals. Here we go. Okay, the fat-soluble antioxidants are pretty good. Vitamin A, beta-carotene, right on the edge of high, not quite elevated, but certainly they wouldn't want to take any more of those. The good news is lipid peroxides are normal. That means the fats aren't being damaged. We're happy about that. Vitamin D is a little low. That's a bummer. Easy to fix. And now we look at this person's omega-3 and omega-6s. And the omega-6s are beautiful. They're all sitting in the normal ranges. Every single one of the omega-6s is right where it's supposed to be. What about this theory where everyone who's sick has high omega-6s? Completely not true. This person's omega-6s are perfect. This person has really great omega-3s except for the ALA. Except for the ALA. See, that's low, and the other ones are fine. So now you're thinking, well, Dan, why did you bore us with all those charts earlier in this class? Well, now you can see why. Because there's a line I'm going to draw right here. Okay, and these are called essential fatty acids for a very specific reason, because they're essential. We have to get them from our diet. We can't manufacture these. Your body can't make these. You have to get them from food. Okay, that's what essential means, is you can't make these. And so the ALA on this patient was low, right? But all these below here were fine. Well, these pathways don't go back up, okay? They only go down. So this person, the only way to correct their imbalance would be if they started to take some flax. It's that simple. The fish oils are down here. Here's our EPA, DHA. They're not going to be able to go back up these pathways and help with ALA. So fish oil would be useless for this person. The omega-3s that they need are the ones from plants like flax, walnut, chia, stuff like that. So again, they're low in ALA. The EPA and the DHA were fine. Remember, these are the fish oils, EPA, DHA, these are fine. Look at any bottle of fish oil, you'll see it says on there, EPA, DHA. Fish oils were fine, they don't need fish oils, they need the ALA, but you can't get the ALA from the fish oils because those pathways don't go up, they only go down. So now, that's why it's important to know these graphs a little bit. We look at the lab and you'll see what I mean. Okay, ALA is low, so they simply need to either get flaxseed oil or just eat flax seeds on a regular basis to get that up. The fish oil markers were all fine. They do not need the fish oils, they just need the flax. So even within the omega-3 family, you can differentiate with the lab what the person needs. The omega-6s were all perfect. Hallelujah, they do not need omega-6. We got a few more minutes. Yeah, I'm just going to keep going until someone stops me. There's no one to stop me here. As you can see, I'm not in my office. I'm on the road today doing this from a distant location. Ooh, look at that. Saturated fats are low. So this person needs a little more saturated fat. Now remember, don't go out and just start eating butter and coconut oil, because this is not the most common thing. But this particular human being doesn't have enough saturated fat in their diet, right? And so you can get too low. Even saturated fat's usually considered bad, quote unquote, but you can get too low in it. It's all lab based, right? Just got to do the test to figure this stuff out. And these are all other fats here. We're going to do one or two more. And try to show you the whole picture with the next one here. How you would really scan this whole thing. Oops, we're out of room there. Hang on a second, let's find a different one. Here we go. So maybe we can just go from top to bottom here. Don't need that. And I'm gonna just show you quickly like a whole test, okay? So it first looks at the amino acids. These are really important for detoxification, for your brain, for energy production, all those kinds of things. It also looks at homocysteine It's a marker for potential risk for cardiovascular disease. The test includes a look at minerals that are good for you: potassium, magnesium, calcium, zinc, selenium, all those. It looks at the bad guys: aluminum, arsenic, cadmium, lead, mercury. Very comprehensive with the minerals. It does the fat-soluble antioxidants, which we've talked about already, right? We'll come back. It does lipid peroxides. It measures vitamin D. It measures 8-OH-DG, which is another oxidative stress marker. That's for the water-soluble area. It measures all the fats that we're talking about over and over again, right? And 2 pages on that. And then it gets into the organic acids, where we look at fat metabolism. That's how your body burns fat. We look at carbohydrate metabolism, how you burn carbohydrate. We look at energy production itself. That's making ATP in the mitochondria. It measures out all the B vitamin markers, very, very important for neurological function and detoxification. It measures methylation, super important. It looks at the brain. Can't imagine anything more important than the brain. It looks at the neurotransmitter metabolites, and it looks at to see whether your brain is inflamed or not. Again, it has more antioxidant markers, a whole big fat section on detoxification in the liver. And then the last part of this test looks at the microbiome and how well the bacteria in the gut are growing out, okay? So that's a whole quick little comprehensive look at the entire panel. Now let's go back for tonight's purposes, and we're gonna look at the markers that we're talking about tonight. So we start off with the fat-soluble antioxidants. This person has good levels of CoQ10, vitamin E, vitamin A. They're all good, okay? Lipid peroxides, borderline high, just on the edge of high. Vitamin D levels are good. Nice to see. And now, similar to one that we saw a minute ago, this person has low ALA, but the fish oil markers are fine. The EPA, DHEA are fine. So the fish oil markers are fine. The flax oil marker, not so good. But this person's a little different. They have 2 markers under the omega-6s that are problematic. The GLA in particular, and this is something you can supplement with. Usually it's from, sometimes the label will say borage oil or borage oil or evening primrose oil, okay? And so this person needs a little bit of flax and a little bit more than a little bit of the omega-6s, the GLA. And what would that help with? Skin problems, fatigue, depression, hormone imbalances, difficulty burning body fat. It can help with anything from eyesight to your kidneys getting better. These essential fats are essential for all body functions, remember, because they're in every cell. They make up the cell membrane, so they're really, really kind of extra important. And then we're going to look at, oh, these are the other markers. I'm not talking about all these because it's too complicated. And let's see if we can look at one more before we wrap it up here. I don't know, something about the volume to me is always a good thing, just seeing a bunch of something. Okay, so one more version of these tests here. Again, we're looking at an ion panel. We're skipping through the amino acids. Ooh, look at these. These are a bunch of high amino acids. We'll talk about that in a future class. High and low amino acids. Ooh, that is not good. Magnesium's really low. Copper is low. That's interesting. We'll have to save this one for later, okay? Oh, here we go. Finally, we got a good one. Now, check this out. CoQ10, low. Gamma tocopherol, that's vitamin E, low. Beta carotene, low. 3 of the 5 main protectors for your lipids are low. If you've ever watched an American football game, if you're from another country outside of America, I know we call it football, you guys call it soccer, but I'm talking about American football. We have the 350-pound guys that are up front on the offensive line, right there in the very front. I was telling this story in New Zealand, and people are looking at me like, what? Because they don't have American football there. But anyways, for the Americans, you guys will get the analogy, right? And the metaphor. And got the quarterback guys hiking the ball. Imagine if the quarterback guy said hike, and then they hiked the ball, and then all the 5 huge guys in the front row just fell down on their bellies. quarterback would get creamed every single time, right? It would just get bowled over. It wouldn't even be very entertaining to watch that. It'd probably be fun to watch that like 3 or 4 times, and it would get kind of old, right? So the idea here is that our front line of defense, what's protecting ourselves, our quarterback, our brain, our heart, right, are these fat-soluble antioxidants. The only thing standing between damage to your cells, right, and these antioxidants is these antioxidants. So these antioxidants are like our frontline defense. They are up there. Free radicals are coming at you. Oxidative stress is coming at you, coming at your brain cells, coming at your heart tissue. And these antioxidants neutralize these free radicals, just like putting water on a fire, right? They just put that blaze out. And if these are low, then you're going to have an unmitigated disaster, and the tissues are going to get damaged. So this person needs CoQ10, vitamin E, and beta carotene right off the bat. Kind of emergency situation there. And then we look at their lipids or their fats, and we see this wackadoodle pattern. Okay, the omega-3s, 3 of the omega-3s are quite low. They clearly need omega-3s. And the omega-6s, what the heck's going on there? One is low and then one is high. And then there's another one that's low, and then there's another one that's high. This is up and down kind of thing going on, right? Linoleic is low, GLA is high, but then arachidonic is low, and then the one after that is high. How could that happen? How could they be going up and down? In fact, if you look at it kind of as a pattern, I didn't plan this on purpose, but the timing here is perfect in terms of proving a point here. So you see this omega-6 is low, but then this one's high. How could that even happen? And then this one's kind of high, but then the one right after is kind of low. And then this one's kind of high. See how that's just like kind of seems impossible? Well, when we're confronted by impossibility in the field of functional medicine, we do two things. First of all, we freak out. And then second of all, we go back and we look at the science and we go, how could that happen? How could these pathways be like this? How could there be one that's high and then one that's low and then one that's high and then one that's low when they should be just converting from one to another? Well, if one is high and then the next one after it is low, clearly that conversion isn't happening. You see that? So let's just pick some easy examples here. Let's say that the LA is high, but the GLA is low. That means this delta 6 desaturase enzyme is broken because that enzyme converts the LA to the GLA. So again, if LA is high and GLA is low, you can see that conversion is not happening. That one fat to the next fat conversion is not happening. And now we know this enzyme is defective. And many people have genetic defects of these enzymes. So it means that you could be born with a delta 6 desaturase problem that doesn't allow the conversion of LA to GLA. You can also inhibit or shut down that enzyme by drinking enough alcohol, believe it or not. Okay, so there's lifestyle reasons why that could happen. But when you see these really schizophrenic patterns and there's an up and a down, it generally means that there's some kind of genetic issue with an enzyme defect. And you can even figure out exactly which enzyme it is. And if you want to get really fancy pants about it, you could do like, the genetic testing and measure all the SNPs and that kind of stuff. So now again, let's look at this case. Hopefully this will make a little more sense now. Low here and then high. Okay, there's going to have to be a problem. Here's a better example, high and then low with the enzymes that are related to the conversions there, okay? There's something wrong with the steps. It could also be dietary, like for example, this patient could be taking GLA as a supplement. That would make sense. That was, even in a couple days or a week or two of taking GLA, that could make this number shoot up, all right? And wouldn't affect this number. So it could be supplement induced as well. Like you can see, we saw a couple people, I think, already who are taking too many antioxidants. You can take too much fish oil. You can take too much of any of these things. And there's some long-term markers on here that are pretty handy. I'll just mention one last thing. For those of you that are really technically oriented or kind of wanting more interesting technical information, MEAD here, polyunsaturated omega-9, is a marker for long-term insufficiency of omega-6s. So in other words, you could supplement and change these numbers in a couple of days or a couple of weeks, but some of these markers are very slow to change. They change over the course of years, and so they throw them in. Mead is very accurate. So like, for example, let's say the patient's, schedules with me and they decide, just like when I go to see the dentist, you know, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go get my teeth cleaned. I start brushing and flossing every day like crazy for a few weeks, So when I get there, everything looks better than it really is most of the time. So the same thing with patients, right? They schedule with me. They're gonna start eating really healthy and doing all kinds of a smoothie with flax seeds or whatever they're doing. So you can sometimes get a little bit tricked with the labs based on someone having just changed their diet, but there are these more stable long-term markers like mead that let you know about the long-term effect of a fatty acid deficiency. Okay. Oh, oleic, that's the one that's related to olive oil. It's kind of cool that you can actually just tell someone, hey, you should take some olive oil. Palmitic is related to, as most of you probably know, coconut oil, right? I mean, sorry, lauric related to coconut oil. So there's a lot of specifics you can get to a diet here as well as you're going through these. And then let me just do a quick summary here, and we're going to wrap it up. Let's see, I think I have, here we go. So the test we're looking at is an ion panel. You can read about it. There's a nice pamphlet that the lab has put together called the Ion Guide. We can send you a copy of it if you want to read about it. It's a little old, but the test hasn't changed at all. It goes through all the different markers that they measure. So let's just do a quick scan here, and you'll see the test covers vitamin D, antioxidants, vitamin A, we talked about that. Vitamin C, we didn't talk about that yet. All the B vitamins are covered. Tell you why they're important: calcium, magnesium, folic acid, B12, lipoic acid, biotin. It's a pretty lengthy, I don't know how many pages this thing is, probably a 20-page document about all the things that they're measuring in the test, okay? So I'm happy to send out a link to this if you guys are interested. You can get more information. Here's the fatty acids that I've been talking about tonight. And that'll give you some general background on the lab. If you're interested in doing the lab, you can become a new patient and do the test. If you're already an existing patient, you're welcome to just contact the office and say, hey, I want to run one of these new tests that Dan is so into right now. And the developer of the test, the scientist that originally created this lab, which is, by the way, this type of test, sometimes it's also called a NutriVal, but the NutriVal or ion panel is one of the most, is really like the core. It's one of the few tests that all functional medicine doctors order. Let me put it that way. There's lots of things that people dabble with here or there, but pretty much every functional medicine doctor orders a GI test and an ion panel or NutriVal. This is like the core of the whole profession. And so the fact now that I'm working with Richard Lord has just been an inspiration to me, and I'm really kind of diving into this higher level of understanding of the labs based on Richard's work, and I want to be able to communicate that to people as best I can. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up for tonight. If you guys have questions, please contact the office. And we'll have this recorded too if you want to share this with friends. Take care, everyone. Have a good evening. Bye for now.